Well, I am in the middle of recapping this 59 champ. This is the one that had the bad power transformer. You can see why I'm recapping it. And the new transformer is in place but not connected yet. I had tried to record everything that I did to show you guys, but the chassis is so small that half the shots were just this. My hand's in there, I'm telling you what I'm doing. So I'll do a quick little montage of some of the key points of what I did to get to this. And I wanted to show you something kind of important before I went any farther forward. Right here, these wires that are hooked over these eyelets, those are the negative leads of the original capacitors. And Fender just ran those long leads from eyelet to eyelet and from eyelet to chassis. And I left them long and bent them over for a good mechanical connection, then trimmed off the grossest excess so that this ground wire and this ground wire cannot pull out of these eyelets, and the connections from this eyelet to this eyelet and this one to this one cannot pull out. That's what happened to whoever had tried to work on that 59 Vibrolux that I had in a couple months ago. And it's a lot of work to redo all that stuff once those connections pull out because they're cut too short. So we're avoiding that. So I'm about to put the new electrolytics in here, and I got some MOD caps that I'm going to try. Some friends of mine who are also techs say that they're good. I've not tried them yet, so I'm going to try them. And if I don't like them, it's pretty easy to change out in a champ. So let me do that, and then we'll get back to it. All right, it's time to put a preamp tube in here and see how it sounds. You can see I've got the new MOD filter caps, 1688. I've got the new cathode bypass caps here. I've got a new cathode resistor here for the cathode bias. It's a 2 watt. My educated guess is has gone from a 470 stock to a 680, though I have 750 and 820. If we need to go up from there, won't know yet. And a 3 watt, 1 watt, 10K, 22K. The old carbon comps were way high in value. Got some extra long secondaries that are not being used here. The red and white are a lower voltage HT tap, and then the green and yellow is the unused filament center tap in this amp. These will be cut short and taped off and tucked away. I just haven't done that yet. For the 57 champ, which needed a new preamp tube, given that not a lot is on the market right now, I decided to order one of the new Pisvane tubes. Here's the box it came in. Kind of pretty. First I thought, did they send me like a lipstick sample? But no, that's the tube box. Very pretty branding. I like it aesthetically. And I was a little concerned because a lot of the photos had looked kind of weird. The pictures of the glass bottles looked overly rounded, but this looks fairly standard. The plates and mica spacers aren't quite straight in the glass, which may or may not affect the sound at all. I don't know, we'll find out. But these have just come on the market when a lot of other things are not on the market, so I decided to try it. And if it doesn't pass muster, we'll get something else for this amp. It's a sample size of 1, so it could be a bad tube out of a good batch. Maybe a fine tube. We'll find out, even if this one has any problems. So I'm going to power it on, let it warm up, and grab a guitar. Just let it warm up for a minute and get a sip of my coffee. My buddy Brad Webb, yesterday, in his video, mentioned that if you are building an amp, getting into amp building, and you build an amp and you power it on and everything works, it's kind of a bad thing because you don't get a chance to learn anything. And I think he's absolutely correct for people learning how to build amps. I will say for myself, especially with the Champ, I have, if it doesn't work first thing for me, I pretty much completely disassembled it and put it back together, then I need to go back to school, because this is not my first rodeo. Let's see if we have sound when I turn the volume up. That's good. I can definitely hear my Wi-Fi router chattering away through it. I need to find a new place for that to live. Doesn't affect all amps. It doesn't affect all amps equally, but it sure affects this one. But the old original speaker seems okay. Let me do some frequency test. That's a pretty promising start, both for the filter caps and for the speaker. So it seems like that original speaker is in good shape. It seems like the filter caps are filtering well, and all the grounds are good. Now let's do what I do on all of these. On a larger amp, I'll change them out without doing this, because it's just faster to change them all out. They almost always need it. But in a small amp like this, where there are just two, maybe those Astrons can stay. But let's see what DC is present on the side that should have no DC. All right, 0.97 volts. All right, 0.58 volts. Both of them are leaking. One of them almost a volt, one of them over a little bit over half a volt. And it's that one that's a little over a half a volt that's really problematic. The one that's leaking about a volt, just kind of put a little static, just a tiny bit of static on that volume pot. But this one is going to put positive DC on the grid of the 6v6. And that is not good, because it will throw off the bias. So I cannot measure the bias and choose the appropriate bias resistor until that positive DC is gone from its grid. So these two Astrons are going to go bye-bye. At which point I will retest, at which point I should have no DC here or here, at which point I can set this bias with modern wall voltages. And then I can trust that the output tubes will be happy, and that little bit of scratchiness should leave the volume control. I always get asked this: hey, you measure those caps in circuit and you said they're leaking. How can you know? Well, there are places where you can and cannot measure leaking DC in circuit. In this case, this has got a 1 meg to ground afterwards, the volume pot. So I know that that is pretty much an ideal way to measure that. And this one I think has got 220K to ground, which is also fine. If they don't have a direct ground reference after them, or there's some other complication, sometimes you have to remove them from the circuit and then put in like a 1 meg to ground just to test it. But if I were to pull this cap up in the air and not have it connected to anything at this end and measure that, I might get wild DC swings, really big, unrealistic ones. It has to have some kind of ground reference. But in this circuit, in situ, it already does. So those are valid readings. Anyway, I'm going to change those out, and we'll see where we're at tomorrow. Well, I said I'd do it tomorrow, thinking that it's late and I should really stop and start getting ready for bed and all that. But I'm impatient, so it's got two 400 volt, 22 nanofarad Vishay MKT 1813s in there. Same value in voltage rating as the original Astrons. Physically much smaller, as are all the electrolytics that I changed out. Much higher quality capacitor than the Astrons. Sounds as Leo intended, and all the leaky DC is gone. And with 114 volts coming out of the wall right now, I can adjust that to 120 with the Variac. I'll do that tomorrow. This 680 ohm resistor puts the bias at 11.25 watts. So with 120 volts coming out of the wall, it's probably going to peak a little bit over 12 watts. But 14 is really the max you have to worry about with a 6v6. The amp will probably sound just fine. I could go to a 750 or an 820 if I was worried about it. I think 680 is going to be a good place to be. So I will do some real playing tomorrow once this is back in the cabinet. And I'm going to make sure all the hardware is tight first, holding the baffle and speaker in place. But I think this amp is probably going to be sounding pretty glorious, given that it has an 8-inch speaker. And when I do the final playing test, I'll make sure the Wi-Fi router is not making that putita-putita. Well, morning rolls around, back to it. This socket is really loose. I should be able to retension the little cups in there. But this socket is not only really loose, the phenolic is broken, which means that there's no rigid structural support. So I'm thinking I need to replace this socket, and odds are the little grommets will need to be changed out at the same time. They wear out and degrade. I will jump off that bridge shortly. So, preamp tube socket's fine. It just needed a cleaning. Now let me start changing this out and see what that buys us. New socket in place, new grommets, and this one I tightened the cups. Now there's still some movement because the pins are kind of loose in the socket, but that's actually much better than it was. And on the output tube, there's no movement at all with the new socket. And that's soldered just like the old one. You can see the new grommet here for the output transformer. This grommet was all degraded because they jammed so many wires through it. Maybe I should change out this socket. Maybe I should change out this socket. Maybe it needs a new knob too. Maybe this pot needs to get changed out. Input jacks, let's make them all shiny. At some point, the ship of Theseus argument comes into play. So I've only changed out the things which absolutely must be changed out. And I expect this thing will sound very nice for a very long time. But it's time to turn to the 57 and get it to the same condition. Because I don't know what little things like this might await me in that one. So time to find out. Well, I know what comes first because this has been a pain in the butt trying to move this around. Well, this will make life a lot more pleasant. And the old one's going to be returned with the amp, of course. But you can actually use this one, which makes it much nicer. Alright, this is the 57. And with the chassis out of the cabinet, I can see that these grommets are all degraded. So all 6 grommets need to be replaced. Very much a non-original output tube socket. Very much made to fit. And overall, the work done on this amp before shows no respect to a Tweed fender. So we're going to clean it all up. So let me get started on that. Well, that took about 45 minutes. Whoever had put in that different tube socket had used some nasty kind of glue on those screws. Fender just used paint, but they had something really nasty in there. I had to Dremel the nut away from the back of this one. No damage to the chassis, and everything in here had one layer of cleaning with isopropyl. I'm gonna get in there with a Q-tip and do a little bit more cleanup stuff in here. Try to get some of the dust out. Let's see if I can get it so you can see it. Sorry about the autofocus thing there. So I've got a lot of it out already, but I just want to get a little bit more cleanliness. Cleanliness is next to toneliness. And places where the wires are, little pockets of dust hid from the first cleanup. You can see here the old hardware is getting an acetone bath to get a lot of the worst of that paint off. But all this will clean up pretty well. And I'll just show what that looks like to a small degree. I always start with a mild solvent. In this case, it's going to be more ISO, because it evaporates, and if it gets on the wires, it'll evaporate out and just leave a clean spot on the wire, as opposed to WD-40 or some other solvent that would soak into the cloth and never want to leave. But some of this makes a difference tonally, some of it doesn't. But it's never a bad thing to leave something better than you found it, or closer to how it was when Lupe last had her hands in it. And this one doesn't have the Lupe tape, the 59 does. But I think it's probably because that piece of tape was lost from this one. I think it's highly likely this would have had something similar, if not Lupe, one of her co-workers. Anyway, let me get in there with some more paper towels and get in those little nooks and crannies and just make sure all the funk nasty is out. In these old repairs, sometimes there's a lot of running to stand still, but these two sockets have been replaced with new grommets. A new socket here with grommets, the ground connections made there. I've got some red nail polish setting up on those 6 screws. Vendor used that light green paint sometimes used a red paint. I like to use that nail polish. It does the exact same thing, but if a tech down the road needs to replace those screws, a Q-tip's worth of acetone takes them right out, which is much nicer than the Dremel I just had to do to get the previous nightmare out. So while that nail polish sets up, I'm gonna run and grab a cheeseburger, and then we'll get back to it. All right, the 57 has this non-original little ceramic and really bad unusable connections on this RCA plug. So I'll put a new cable. Went with a G8C, and this ceramic transplant had no gaskets. You know, this got this cork gasket, so the edge of the cone was actually pressed up pretty much against the wood of the cabinet. That might explain why this sounded so bad. That plus it's a "Will Mrs. Johnson please come to the office" kind of speaker. So I've got some good quality wire here, and I think I'll put a new RCA plug on there. It's the same switchcraft as the original one, and I'll just return this in the box the new one came in. I'll get that ready, then we'll put everything back in the cabinet. You get to see the state it's in now, and you'll get a chance to hear it. Alright, this is that 57 all put back together. Looks very similar to the 59, obviously, because I used a lot of the same components in both. This one has the warehouse, and there is seemingly zero hum. Probably too loud for the camera. Sounds tiny, of course. Got some scratchy DC there that I don't remember. Didn't have that with the same tube on the other amp, but just in case, let me see if it's the preamp tube. This is that Pisvane, I believe. Yeah, I'm putting this JJ, see if the problem stays with the socket and components. That could be the 68K grid leaks or the cathode bypass cap there. In rare instances, the 1 meg, but less likely to be that. Alright, so this amp has some kind of noise on the grid, so I need to go back in there. I do want to check one thing though. On that Pisvane, I saw a colleague of mine post some test results with some Pisvane 12X7s he just got with some very low mu figures and transconductance readings, like 55 instead of 100. So as with the JJ, this may pop, but I want to change out the tube without changing any of the volume settings. Yeah, I'm getting a little bit more volume, a little more gain with the JJ than with the Pisvane, so that Pisvane may not make the grade. I'll do some more testing on that. But before I put the 59 together and start buttoning these things up, I need to see where that is coming from. And it could be this cathode resistor right here, but it's more likely one or of these 68Ks. Right here, and that's just based on having done this quite a few times. So let me find my stash of 68K carbon comps and change those out and see if the can go away. Well, frustratingly, I only have one carbon comp 68K. Actually, I have two, but one has been cut too short for this. So let me see if I can isolate it to just one of the two. It's there using, at least, it's in both positions, but the 68K on the right is used in both positions. I'm going to change that one, and fingers crossed that will do the trick. If not, I'll go get some more tomorrow and change them both. I carry a wide stock of stuff, but since the supply chain disruptions in the past 2 years, some things have gotten harder to keep in stock. Well, that scratchy DC is gone, as I expected. Sadly, both 68K resistors were bad, and then, like I said, I only had the one carbon comp, so I'll run out tomorrow morning and get some more 68K carbon comps so they can match, except for places in the power supply where I don't trust carbon comps. As much as possible should be kept original. Granted, it's just pretty much the resistors here. Everything else wore out. But, you know, it is from 1957. It's sounding really good. Haven't done a high volume test, which I'll do when I'm not rolling the camera, because it'll just spaz out the mic, but you'll get to hear it for real. Let me turn my attention now to its brother, the 59, and I want to measure all the voltages at each node with the same wall voltage, just to see what difference there is between the original power transformer and the Hammond. I don't expect there'll be much. Alright, both amps are put all the way back together, aside from I still need to shorten up the unused secondaries on this one. That one's got the original speaker, that one's got the new warehouse. You'll get a chance to hear all that later. They both have brand new leather handles. The one on the left wants to stand up more, the one on the right wants to lay down flat more, that's fine. And the original leather handle to this one is in here, and the original leather handle and the bad plastic replacement handle for this one are in here. This one has its spare tubes. Both amps are reunited with the tubes they came in with. In both cases, the output tubes and rectifiers are fine. In both cases, the preamp tubes were really, well, On the one on the left, it was really noisy, and on the one on the right, it had no signal. I've got a JJ on the one on the left, I've got that Pisvane on the right, and the Pisvane seems to have a little less gain. And I'm going to follow that up a bit, but I think that tube may not make the cut. But in which case, both amps need a new 12AX7. I'm going to see what's available from my various vendors this week. I first powered up each amp with the same set of tubes, with the same voltage, and took some measurements, and they're really close to each other. Amp A, which is the one on the right, everything, the secondaries are running about 10 volts lower than amp B on the left. So is that correct? Amp A is on the right. Yeah, so amp B, it's got 325, 325 for its HT secondary. That's the Hammond. And the original is 335, 335, which means that there's initially about a 10 volt difference, but it balances out, and they're within 5 to 7 volts of each other throughout as it scales. No real difference in performance from that, just slightly in individual characters. But then again, they have different speakers anyway. So this is where I'm going to leave them for just a short while. I'm going to get new preamp tubes for each, and the one on the right is going to get a new carbon comp 68K input grid Leaky resistor, as I mentioned before. But the majority of the work is done, and they look great, and soon you'll get to hear them.